Cannot hear you, unfortunately.
All right, Yeshim, are you with us?
Yeah, I do. I'm sorry, I could be there in person. Hello, everyone.
Had a couple of great presentations recently on EITC and broadening the tax base and tax equity and property tax relief and tax resiliency, which we're still going over. They've been very helpful. And tonight, the part of the show is the mayor's economic plan. We're looking forward to hearing Sharon Carney, the chief of staff at DIMPED, and her colleagues, which I'm sure you'll introduce to us. So we want to hear about the plan. I think we've all reviewed it, so you can probably give us the highest level version. We're particularly interested in the intersections, obviously, with tax policy. So if there are things you think we should know or consider that should be on our agenda, I hope you'll highlight those. In addition, if there are areas where you think we could do some research that would help form us as well as your own plan, do let us know. And our goal is to have a plan, our report comes out at the end that really complements what the mayor's plan is as well. So we're eager to hear what you have to say. So before we get to you, though, we'll do any administrative items from the commission director or tonight? No,
Not much. We met last week, so I don't have much more to say. Our next meeting after this is 2 weeks hence, in which we will be talking about the work of the 2013 Tax Commission and other tax commissions around the country and talk about how that could inform us both substantively and in terms of process and how we go forward.
excellent.
And I guess I just also want to say big thanks to Sharon and the whole deputy mayor's office. They've been great about using this as an opportunity, given the commission's charge, to talk about how the tax code can best support and connect with the future of the DC economy. Seemed like the mayor's plan is a great jumping off place for that conversation.
Yeah, I think the rest of the DIMPED team is here. Can you all join us at the table, please? Sarosh and John Fletcher, here, Deputy Mayor for Planning and Economic Development.
Share there.
I don't bite. I was gonna slide this way.
So I think what I saw in the agenda is we're gonna have you're gonna break the presentation up into 3 sections, and we're gonna have questions in between.
Yes.
So about around 10 minutes of talking and then 20 minutes of questions, and we'll do three rounds of that. Is that all right, John? Okay. So why don't you introduce your team and we'll get going.
Sure. Well, thanks for having us. Appreciate the time and appreciate the way you set it up, because we do think that a lot of the work that you all are doing are going to help us actually make this plan come to a reality. This plan, I think, is a little bit different from previous economic strategies that focused on our GDP and our rates of employment, which are key indicators. But we've tried to make this a little bit more people-focused and make it a little bit more clear and sort of just making the goals a little bit broader. So Sharon Carney is going to walk us through it. She is the chief of staff at DIMPED, and I call her the architect of DC's comeback plan. So all the questions should be directed to Sharon.
Duly noted.
Duly noted. And then Svanley Cook is our director of business development. In addition to helping us pull together this plan, if there was a business in DC that ever needed a grant, Svanley Cook is where they go, among other things as well. In addition to that, I kid about the grants because during this time of coming out of the pandemic, that was a big focus for us. In a normal year, we maybe have in the tens of millions of dollars in grants. During the pandemic years, and with the mayor's leadership and the council's support, over $350 million in grants to DC businesses. And then Sarosh Abdulwala is our director of real estate. He's center table because real estate, it matters, location. So he's helped us think through how we bring back downtown, more specifically, and then how do we utilize all of the projects that DIMPED has and the tools that we have in the toolkit to advance real estate as well. And then Ben Mendez, who is our deputy chief of staff, is at the end of the table, just so that we have these surrounded. And he is works with Sharon to come up with this and is helping us with some of the more shouldn't say popular, attention grabbing items like housing in downtown, which I know has been something that in the months since we launched this has really gotten a lot of attention. So with that, I'll turn to Sharon to jump into the substance, and then all the team here is here to help answer questions and talk us through it.
All right. Well, thank you, Greg, so much for having us and all of the commissioners. We actually included in the comeback plan the work of the Tax Revision Commission. We have been following along and are excited to see what you all come up with. So we were really happy to have an opportunity to come and talk with you tonight. As I know you already know, because you've all done your homework, you've read the plan, you know the goals, you know that there's three main areas of action: thriving people, opportunity-rich neighborhoods, and successful businesses. So what we're gonna do is not talk at you the whole time. We're gonna share like maybe 7 to 10 minutes of background on the insights, the planned action, and some topics that we think the commission could think about for each of those three areas, then open it up for discussion. So we'll talk, we'll discuss as a group, we'll talk, we'll discuss as a group, and one more time, and that'll get us through the evening, I think. So next slide. The comeback plan, I think you all know this, it's a 5-year economic development strategy. We will submit it to the Economic Development Administration as our official economic development strategy, and it was informed by not just data, but conversation with many stakeholders, starting with internal government agencies. So this goes way beyond the DEMHED cluster. We were engaging with TMHHS, operations and infrastructure, all the important members of the district government. And as you know, next slide, it has 6 bold goals. I'm not going to get into all of those goals because I know you've already read them. But today we're going to focus on a few of those that I think are most salient to some of the questions about tax policy and potential reform. So let's start with just some background on tax revenue in the district. When we think about economic development, it really comes down to how do you improve the economic outcomes for residents of the District of Columbia, number one. And number two, how do you drive tax revenue? How do you drive tax revenue? Because we need to support programs that support our residents. So we are not tax policy experts at DEMHED. We are economic development officials. But I think it's important for us to understand where our revenue is coming from, our tax revenue. So some insights from the latest ACR. We know that compared to a lot of other jurisdictions, we're pretty well diversified in terms of sources of tax revenue, with income and property tax being the most significant drivers at 43, I think, and 31% respectively, most recently. We also know that income tax has become increasingly important since the pandemic and really over the last decade or so. And our property tax revenues are experiencing some weakness with a slight reduction in estimated property values in the most current year. And what we also saw most recently is an increase in sales tax. And that is really pushed, I think, by the rebound of hospitality and tourism. I think that's a potential opportunity for more growth as we bring back visitors and invest in some new ways in marketing. So diving a little bit deeper into income tax, our largest tax revenue contributor, we know that a lot of the vast majority of income tax is coming from individual taxpayers as opposed to businesses. We have also been seeing the growth as a trend over the last decade or so. And what you can see on the chart on the right is that a lot of the individual tax revenue is coming from our highest earning payers. So 60% of individual income tax revenue comes from the top 10% of earners, which I think reinforces some of what we know about the need to grow our middle class. We've got a lot of high earners. We've got a lot of people earning lower than average median income. And so there's a real need to support the middle class. If we go a little bit deeper into property tax revenue, we know that we have seen some declines in the growth rate of property tax revenue, mostly driven by sustained vacancy in the office market. Historically, commercial property tax revenue has been the vast contributor, and I think still is, to our property tax revenue. But we are, experiencing and probably will see, I think, as the CFO can tell you, likely that we'll see some additional contractions in the future. So that's something that we are attentive to. So why is this important? Our overall takeaway for economic development is that our people drive revenue. They are incredibly important. They are the centerpiece of our comeback plan. And we are really focused on ensuring that people continue to choose DC as a place to live, and that when they live here, when they choose to live here, they can thrive. So we want to help them grow their incomes. We want to help them live a high quality of life. And that's really what the plan is based around. So action and goals. We'll start with thriving people, 5 to 6 minutes, and then we'll open it up for discussion. So we set 2 goals in the plan related to thriving people. The first is an overall population growth goal. You know this. We had a peak around 2018, 19, lost about 35,000 residents, and then stopped the slide in the most recent census, increased by about 3,000 people. So maintaining that growth and increasing the pace is one of the goals. The next is raising the median household income of Black households. We have a pretty significant gap between white and Black household income in the district. We want to reduce that gap. And so we have action in the plan that's really focused on achieving that. One of the other insights that I think informs some of our population growth target and some of the action around it is the tax impact of residency. So what we know is that living in the district, a resident is going to contribute significantly more to tax revenue than somebody who lives outside of the district and commutes in or doesn't commute in, right? We know that hybrid and remote work is pretty sticky, probably here to stay to some degree, at least in partial ways. And so as we think about economic development, understanding the tax impact of whether somebody chooses to live in the district or is located outside of the district is really important. There's a lot we could go into here, but in the interest of time, we will move on to the next slide. I think one really important question as we think about our goals is what will it take to retain our residents? How can we ensure that people can continue to live in the district and thrive? One of the most important aspects of that is affordability, both housing affordability, but also affordability of childcare. Childcare is increasingly expensive in the district. And of course, part and parcel with that is helping to boost people's purchasing power, which is part of why we have the median household income goal. What we know about who's leaving and why is that housing is a huge driver. Of the 44 roughly thousand people who left DC between 2015 and 2019, they really talked about housing. So higher quality housing, newer housing, more space, opportunity to purchase a home, safer neighborhood. The list sort of runs the gamut. And we know that the average income level of those folks who had to leave or chose to leave is about 67,000. So that equates to about 80% of median family income for a 1-person household, or 60% of median family income for a 2-person household. So housing is a huge driver. People, of course, also left for job-related reasons, personal reasons like changes in marital status, but housing continues to be important. And one of the things that we also know from some of our work over the summer with the Black homeownership strike force, which Mayor Bowser stood up to increase Black homeownership in the district, is that there's a number of things that could help with the preservation of homeownership. So folks who are already homeowners. Some of the recommendations that we heard were to increase awareness of the various resources, including tax resources that are available, increasing support for condo associations, also in providing funding and support for people who are inheriting property and working through some of the tax implications of the inheritance process. We are in the process of implementing a lot of the recommendations that came out of that work, alongside continuing to grow the supply of affordable housing. This next slide gives you a sense of where people are going when they leave the district. And, you know, I would say overall, it's not that far away. These are our surrounding jurisdictions. And so another part of our action plan is to increase the advertising and marketing to folks who have recently left the district and may want to return. I've sort of given you some hints at the action plan to support the Thriving People goals in the comeback plan. This slide runs through those in a little bit more detail, not all of the detail. But generally speaking, we're focused on increasing affordability of both housing and childcare in the district, boosting resident incomes through workforce development and education initiatives, increasing access to homeownership, both access to it and preserving it, making our neighborhood safer, and making it easier for residents to access government services. So in the next slide, you'll see sort of the journey, the pathway that people can take when trying to access government services. We are working with internal partners to build a system that's much more seamless. And I think that brings us to our discussion. So we aren't the tax policy experts, but we thought there are some questions that you all should consider. The first, with regards to economic mobility, how can current tax credits or the current tax structure be expanded to support middle income residents and families, particularly to alleviate the cost of housing, increase access to homeownership, and support homeownership preservation? The second, should the district explore tax strategies like a negative income tax or combining existing tax credits to provide cash assistance without the threats of benefit cliffs? We implemented a pilot in the past year, cash assistance focused on mothers or expecting mothers. Have learned a lot about the challenges that folks experience when trying to navigate through a system, the various systems. So that's an idea worth considering. And then finally, how can the tax code further be utilized to expand access to childcare and alleviate childcare costs? So with that, I will turn it over to you for some questions. And once we conclude that, we'll shift into some of the other sections of the plan.
Before we get started, we were joined by two commissioners, so you guys want to introduce yourself?
Rashad Young. Jim Hudson.
Great. Thank you.
Jody is offline.
What's that?
Jody is offline.
I'm here. I'm here as well. Thank you.
I'll take the prerogative to sit in that the chart you had for reasons people leaving the city. Obviously, cost, underscore everything, and income taxes are a major cost for everybody that lives here, but they're not listed as an explicit reason for people to leave. Relatively high income taxes vis-a-vis the jurisdictions where a lot of people are moving. Do you find that was a factor, or is that just implicit in everything that's there because it's such a large cost, or where do income taxes fit into that reason for people leaving?
I don't think that it surfaced as the highest concern. I think that we hear much more about housing affordability generally. We do have high property values in the district, which contribute to a higher tax bill. But I think that a variety of issues related to housing more directly are what's on people's minds.
Just if I could follow up on that, do you study our high earners may not move, so they may not come in, just in migration, out migration, but they can change residency to, a non-tax jurisdiction like Florida. So they may not come into that picture. How do you study those households?
You're saying the folks who don't formally change their address?
Right. In other words, Erica, during the pandemic realized she could both live in the district and also live in Florida because she could work remotely. She keeps her DC home. She remains, the rest doesn't change, but she simply changes her residence to Florida, although she is physically here whatever the 180 days a year. Does that reflect an increased numbers?
So, generally speaking, we're not doing primary research at DemPed. We oftentimes collaborate with the CFO's office. I think they did some really interesting analysis of USPS data during the pandemic to track moves. And we have seen some people who left during the pandemic start to come back. I think that's part of what contributed to the 3,000% increase. What we pulled from here is census data, and this was 2015 to 2019, so it was pre-pandemic.
Thank you.
On the chart where you had the 21 versus 22 numbers, it looked relatively rosy, but of course, or 20 with 20 and 21, but of course, 20 was a very bad year. So in terms of, the income taxes going up 17% or something, do you know what that would have been compared to 19?
I feel like I really should defer to the CFO on this because we were just pulling from their most recent report.
So, the one thing I can say, when we look at income tax data, it's with a lag because of how they release it. And we have had a chance to look at income tax data in terms of since the pandemic and the tax increase and what that has done to migration. As Sharon said, what we've looked at is just the USPS data. And that just tells you where people, what it is going to delve into that level of detail that you're asking.
Rick, can I have one follow-up if you don't mind, but if anyone else has a question?
Question asked, on page 10, you have listed, medium household income of like 25,000 to, 78,000. That's ambitious in a 5-year period, which rate went 3 down. What percentage increase that there's part 1, part 2 was, how we gonna do that?
Thank you. I'm sorry, what was the first question?
The percentage to 78,000, 10 to 78 or 40 to 78,
What's our baseline? Yeah, so currently, median in household income for Black households is $52,000 or $53,000 a year. So that's what puts us at 78. And that is the living wage as defined by United Way's Alice Index for a 2-person household. So that's sort of target. The plan for getting there, and I wish I would have brought our comeback plan for everybody because I like to give you page number references. But we ran out. They're very popular. But so the plan for getting there, I think, is a combination of things. There is within our workforce and education cluster, there's a number of initiatives, some of which are continuation of things that have been started recently or have been working well. So the Career Coach program, which was about a year ago, this is helping individuals looking for jobs, find new opportunities. That is planned to continue. We are also looking at expanding the use of skills-based hiring. And I think there could be some opportunities to work with private employers on that as well. We're looking at reducing barriers to occupational licensing. Which is something that came up in a lot of our stakeholder conversations, particularly with people who've had some experience with the justice system. And there is a lot of work related to strengthening pathways in target sectors. So a little bit later, when we get into the business section, Subangli is going to talk about 6 target sectors that we're looking at to grow. And so working closely with our workforce partners to build those pathways is part of what we'll do to boost incomes. The life sciences sector, for example, I think 33% of jobs are, they don't require a bachelor's degree, but it could be more like, a high school diploma. And they are considered gateway jobs. So I think that's an opportunity area to dig into. And then beyond workforce and education, housing, stable housing is a really necessary platform to people boosting their earning potential. There's a lot of social determinants of health that can contribute to that indirectly. And so a lot of our neighborhood focused goals, increasing internet access, high speed, reliable access for every single DC resident. I think that's another really important part of boosting median household income. Yep.
Just talk about wealth creation. There's obviously a difference between income and wealth.
Yes.
And so we have gaps both. One area of interest of mine is how we further expand the opportunity accounts in meaningful ways. Because then, you know, for instance, the contributions could be pre-tax, which currently they're after tax. So you, pre-tax contributions, you could increase the amount. Income earned and generated on the accounts could be tax-free. You know, again, if I remember correctly, these funds could be used for home ownership, medical emergency, education, retirement, and also business creation. So, you know, just as we have an earned income tax credit that rewards work, I really like this program that rewards savings and it rewards particular types of investments that lead to wealth, home ownership, education, business. Sometimes we have medical emergencies, sometimes we retire, hopefully. You know, a tax policy, John, and you know, and ensuring that focus on advantaging from a tax perspective, those investments with some, admittedly, additional contributions on the part of the treasurer. So free tax dollars, more wide distribution of the program, and incentivizing participation. But I think we should be rewarding people for saving. That is a good thing. And taking chances on themselves. That is a good thing.
Yeah, thank you for that perspective. DEMHED does not oversee this program, but the Department of Insurance Securities and Banking, as I'm sure you know, they have been running this, and my guess is that they really welcome that perspective. So I appreciate that. Thank you.
It just seems like the fastest way. I mean, you can earn money yourself through your labor, but you can also have assets that generate cash as well.
Yeah.
We ought to be encouraging the narrowing of the wealth gap as much as the income gap.
Yeah, absolutely. And so part of what, so as we were formulating the plan, you know, we took a lot of factors into consideration in setting some of those goals, and we had some really spirited conversations about whether there should be a wealth building target, you know, closing the wealth gap. And what we, you know, one of the things we realized is that, you know, transparency and accountability are really important in setting forth a goal and targets, and income data is much more easily available more regularly, and also sort of directly contributes to some of the actions that are necessary to boost income, whereas wealth building might take a little bit longer. So that's sort of what went into our thinking around goal setting. But we have built in some initiatives to help build wealth. I talked a little bit about homeownership, both increasing access to homeownership and helping people stay and remain homeowners. The legal services program for heirs that will launch later this month is also focused on wealth building. We plan to continue some of the entrepreneurship related programs, such as Aspire, which works with returning citizens to launch businesses, the Dream Grant program out of DSLBD, and also the Commercial Property Acquisition Fund, which helps small business owners purchase commercial property, are just a couple of the ways, in addition to opportunity accounts, that we're looking at supporting wealth building.
Just a question? Carolyn?
No, he asked my.
Sean?
Yeah. I don't know if DEMHED has the answer to this question, or if it's something you all would know, but if you think about tax credits as a way to help address cost of housing, and particularly for the demographic that is represented by the out-migration, or at least the economic strata that's referenced by the out-migration, is there any research or data that tells us what the impact of a tax credit can be for home ownership for this demographic? And can you do that to scale in a way that's meaningful for population retention? Because sometimes when we do tax credits, they end up costing a lot by volume, but the credit itself is relatively small, such that it doesn't actually motivate a person, I think, to do anything different or provide any real benefit. So we think about, trying to do that as a way to stem the tide for out-migration, like what would that cost? And is there any research that shows that it actually works to help people buy homes or stay at homes or otherwise make a decision about what jurisdiction they're located in?
I think that's an excellent set of questions. And would guess that there's some folks around this table who may have some answers. But, you know, one thing that we say a lot is, you know, a program, credit, a resource is only useful if people know about it. All right. And so, you know, part of what we are trying to do is raise awareness of what already exists. And I think I might be mistaken, but I think that's some of the work that's planned for this group too, like looking at utilization and what's been effective. I hope it is. Because I do think that we need to be focused on those things that we can have confidence will have impact. But part of what we are trying to do, at least in the short term, is raise awareness of those things that exist. About a year and a half ago, I think you may have still been in your prior role. We launched Front Door, frontdoor.dc.gov. So 60 plus programs that we support, all searchable at one website. So that's one effort to do that, but we'll be rolling out a marketing and advertising campaign that's very targeted to raise awareness of those things more so that we can have a better sense of what's useful and drive utilization to those things that exist.
I see Jody McLean's hand raised.
Yes.
I'll wait for Yesham. Go ahead.
Thank you, Jody. I'm waiting here, Peggy. Shanti, thank you so much. This is really great presentation. I have a very basic question. I can imagine this plan being implemented through number of levers, maybe something that has to do with tax policy, something that has to do with regulatory policy, and something that has to do with social spending. Do you guys have any sense of sort of like what you think that the cost of doing all the things you have in mind, after all the tax regime will to play, either raise revenue for your, you know, programs in mind, or change incentives for coming to the city? And in other words, how sort of like think your levers in these three different. Thank you.
I think what's the total cost is the main question. Does everyone agree with that? So I don't know. I mean, there's inflation, you know, it's a 5-year plan. So, so what I can tell you is we'll have a cost, at least for the investment for fiscal year 24 very soon, like around March 2nd. So the short answer is, I wouldn't say we have a price tag on everything, because part of what this is intended to be is a living document. You know, this is not like we just etched it in stone. It is the plan for the next 5 years and it doesn't change. We need to iterate, you know, I mean, part of what we've built into this is what are the recommendations from this esteemed body? There's going to be some good ideas, I think, coming out of it, and that could change the situation. And so we have some price tags on some down payments, I'll say, for some key programs that we know will get a certain return in terms of the impact we're looking for. But there's not like one single number for the whole thing.
Jody, do you have a question?
I do. My question is a little bit off subject, but you were talking about housing and that being one of the reasons people are exiting. The district has the opportunity to sunset the fiscal year 20 increase in commercial property and deed and recordation tax at the end of September, I think, of this year, as specified in the current law. When we think about the future housing production, I think it's important for those goals and the revitalization of downtown that this tax is lowered. It's been a huge barrier going in over the last couple of years. Does your analysis assume the tax increase will sunset, or how is that being handled?
Well, I was just, and Commissioner Young is smiling because it was his fault. He put it in place. But I knew you were. Didn't make eye contact.
I'm sorry I'm not there in person.
Well, you're kind of in between us on the speaker, so it all works out. But I would say that, so the mayor will release her budget on March 22nd. So we never get ahead of the mayor on that. I do think that it's worth debating, and whether it's in the mayor's budget proposal or not. I think it's an area that members of the council may look at for a source of revenue. So I think regardless of what is in or not in the mayor's budget, I think that's an area that those who are concerned about it should stay engaged throughout the budget process. Sometimes, especially at the very end, when
Right.
there's
I understand what you're saying. I think this is then, got it, important for us to be talking with council members about too. But I think this is, yep,
I was gonna say too, I think just like Sharon said on the last question, you know, this is about goal setting, and what this plan does is just that. And what we tried to do, and this goes, I think, to Commissioner Hudson's question, we tried to set these goals in a way that we can measure. So Sharon talked about why we did, you know, household income versus net worth, because with household income, we could measure it regularly. So you all know when the mayor put out that goal of creating 36,000 homes in DC by 2025, she did that in January 2019. In October, we put out the report about how we would actually get there. So the housing equity report. So I think as you see the way our work will develop in all of these focus areas and among the 6 goals is we'll work with our partners throughout the government to be able to tell people how we're going to get there, and then also how we're going to measure our success on a regular cadence. I'm not guaranteeing this will be the case for all 6 goals in the plan, but going back to that housing example, every month at 36k.dc.gov, we tell people how far we are towards achieving that goal. So with this plan, we hope to be able to do that. And what that does is it allows us to, like Sharon said, to iterate and decide, you know, where do we have to make bigger moves? Where do we have to make sometimes even bigger bets to achieve the goal? So you'll see that this is kind of our launch of the plan, but we hope to make this a guiding document so that we can measure against it and then make those changes that we need to in order to achieve it.
And that may be a good segue into the next section, which is,
Yeah, I have one more thing I just wanted to add. First of all, I'm so pleased to see this plan tackle early education. I like to call it early education and not childcare, but it's so innovative. And I think we haven't yet as a city began to understand what an impediment is for people to attract the right kind of people that you want in your offices, but also for people entering the workforce. I think unstable childcare situations is one of the single biggest impediment to having people stay in a job. So it's great. So your question is, can the tax code be further utilized? I hope so. And I pledge that we'll certainly focus on that as well. And also wanted to mention, and one of my colleagues who's more smart than I on this topic can talk about it, but we had a couple speakers ago in layman's terms advocated an EITC for property tax, a refundable tax credit that would be attached to your property tax. And he made a very compelling argument for it at the time. Do you remember it enough to just to summarize it for our friends? But
Was that with COVID?
oh,
You're talking about the expansion of Schedule H of our property tax
yes, but
circuit breaker?
he made it part of it being refundable.
Yeah.
Yeah,
This
think
is
that's
It already is
refundable, but he talked about expanding.
it's pending.
expanding it, lifting the limits on it. And he had a great chart that
Great chart.
showed how, depending on sort of your income and value of your property, you might be paying a lot more than someone sort of in a similar economic situation than you because of the value of share that with you. But
Yeah.
It's really
the
good.
expansions of that circuit breaker could be.
Well, I think also kind of a theme that's come up already is kind of the problem we're facing is kind of a missing middle, right? So we have a lot for folks who are need that assistance, need that hand up. And then there are people who have a lot of means, who could live anywhere, who decide to live here. And then the crunch are where people feel the pressures in that middle. And if you look at that chart, actually, Gregory, I don't know what page the top chart you have right now, but that chart of when people leave, it's in their like mid-30s, which is probably when they're thinking about starting their family. So to your point about how impactful is that? Well, childcare,
Right.
early education is something that's more accessible, and maybe that housing crunch doesn't feel as, burdensome. And then they sort of head to the suburbs.
I will say one of the interesting data points you have in here about the increase in the share of taxpayers that are in the $100,000 or up section or level. When I went to the ACFR to look at the table that comes from, it also shows that we over that 2013 to 2022 period gained about 37,000 tax filers over that period. And that income level gained about 40,000 tax filers. So just to that point about the missing middle,
The missing.
we're gaining people who are earning a lot more, and that's why you're seeing that share of revenue coming from income taxes grow. We've actually lost some at some of those lower income levels, like 10 to 25 and 25 to 50. So I think it sort of maybe speaks to like where the support is most needed. And so when I think about housing affordability, I think the circuit breaker, but also like just more affordable housing out there.
So, time for a follow-up. Sharon, are you looking at Wilmot's property, where we're looking at 36,000 units? I think there's easily 6,000 units that are available between Friendship Heights, Fort Totten, Brookland, and Anacostia. And depending on whether or not there can be zoning variances if they go high, but a tax credit, or not a tax credit, a freezing in property taxes right now where we're not earning any revenue on those sites could be folded into either more units or more affordability. Is that, John, something that you all are looking at? I mean, 6,000 seems like a really big percentage of your 36,000 if you can have that and they're shovel-ready projects.
Yeah, I was just looking, Glenn was keeping an eye on you when he said, they weren't paying taxes on it just yet. Like he was gonna verify that, and make sure, but I think one of the things that we see is that it could be, at least that 6,000. There's also, part of the discussion and, this plan is whether the HIDAC, is something that we should look at, which would actually create more, value in some of those places, for, Metro to go in taller and have transit-oriented development where you max out, even higher density.
Like, I don't want to get Glenn mad at me. I'm not trying to take money out of the treasury. I'm just saying that if you look at that Lord and Taylor site, as we move the bus barn, it's perfectly situated for a lot of pretty dense development. I mean, I could get 2 or 2,500 of these 6,000 units. And depending on whether or not, you look at, yes, we might be receiving some taxes on that Lord and Taylor site now. There are lots of ways you can skin the cat. You can simply freeze the tax on a current level, not take anything out of the treasury, but then help aid in affordability. But anyway, it just seems like a pretty big set of land here for us to look at 6,000.
Yeah, I think the other thing too is that, this, I think tax policy matters, but also the ability and the path to gain the higher height and density. If you look at Mazza Galleria, they actually, went matter of right. Because they didn't want to take the risk of having an extended period of time where they didn't have certainty about their development plans. So I think the tax, implications are important, but there's also some policy issues on land use policy issues that kind of bear on that as well.
And just the other, I think, important angle to what you're raising is that, part of what we published in the comeback plan is where our projections for the 36K and the 12K goals. So the 12,000 are the affordable. And we are projecting that we will meet that 12,000 goal by 2025. But as you mostly probably know, those 12,000, we have targets for every one of the 10 planning areas of the district, because it's important that affordable housing exists everywhere, not just in one part of the city. And there's a handful of places where we're not projected to meet our targets. And this kind of goes back to the point earlier about being able to iterate and measure and track and adjust strategy as needed. The Friendship Heights area, the Rock Creek West planning area is not projected to meet the target right now. So part of, along with Capitol Hill and downtown mostly, but it's a little bit short. But part of the Wilmot opportunity, I think, is that could contribute units in a place where we're not on track.
Part two.
Part two. So opportunity-rich neighborhoods is the second of 3 big categories of the comeback plan. As you all know from reading the plan, this includes a number of goals related to eliminating amenity gaps like food access, high-speed, reliable internet. What we're going to focus on though today is the goal related to downtown, because I think that's an area of a lot of interest for the commission. And so I know you also know that there is a goal to add 15,000 residents to the downtown population over the next 5 years. We think that downtown is a huge opportunity for this. What will that require? It means we need 9,400 more or less new housing units, or about 7 million square feet of new residential downtown, 1 million of which is already in the pipeline. But it promises to make our downtown a bit more vibrant. And over the long term, we see the need to add about 87,000 new units. New residents. So why did we set this goal? I think we are all aware of some of the trends related to commercial real estate and commercial vacancy in particular. So of the roughly 100 million square feet of office space downtown, about 20 million is vacant. And as we continue to see hybrid and remote work sustain, we know that those vacancy rates will climb. And so I think we've got a classic supply and demand issue. We've got a lot more supply than demand. One thing that we are doing very aggressively is working to fill the space, and Subangli is going to talk a little bit more about our business attraction, retention, and expansion efforts. But we also think that downtown could be put to better use for people, for residents, places to live, places to visit, have fun, entertainment. And so that is part of what the rationale is for that goal. Let's see, another trend, I think, that is shaping some of our thinking around downtown and really some of our action is the federal government. It's very timely that today we are at the State of the Union is happening, and we know that the federal workforce has not really returned to the office in the way that at least the district government has. That has short-term implications for our economy. For small businesses, for people who are relying on the nearly 200,000 workers who are coming downtown. But the real estate portfolio of the federal government is also a significant opportunity for us. I think 25%, more or less, percent of the real estate downtown is controlled by the federal government, either through leases or as owned property. They are actively working to consolidate. And so that could create opportunities for dispositions, for transfers of jurisdictions. There's some federal sites that could potentially be future housing or entertainment destinations. And so that is something we are actively thinking about and exploring. This next slide is sort of the very high level overview of the downtown action plan. If you've talked to John, if you've talked to the deputy mayor about downtown, you know that we are working to fill the space, change the space, and bring the people. Fill the space is largely about business attraction, retention, and expansion, using tools like the Vitality Fund, which we launched last year. We also see some opportunities to grow the university footprint. There's some really exciting university activity happening downtown, and further grow the Penn West Equity and Innovation District. Changing the space is really largely focused on bringing more residential, but also thinking more creatively about public space. How do we use streets? How do we expand our Street for People program, which helps to support recurring street closures? And then finally, bring the people, which drives a lot of sales tax revenue. There is, I think, a lot of untapped opportunity to bring back visitors. And the council recently passed the Tourism Recovery District legislation that will help to expand marketing efforts and really drive visitation. We're also thinking about the new kinds of visitors, remote workers who can work anywhere. Why not try out DC for 2-3 months? Finally, we will be given the transformative nature of some of the aspirational goals for downtown. We will be working with some external stakeholders to get even more granular around an action plan to detail this out a little bit more. So as we think about new residents downtown and the housing that will be needed to bring them there, we are working to implement a new program, the Housing in Downtown tax abatement. This is a 20-year abatement approved in last year's budget. There is a 15% affordable housing requirement, affordable at 60% area median income. DemHead just last week published an overview of this program and sort of how it would work. We are inviting feedback because we have been hearing a lot of informal feedback from folks, people who are experiencing some challenges related to capital and investors with some of the regulations, TOPA in particular. So we're giving sort of one last call for feedback on this program. And once we finish that process, we'll be issuing regulations later this year and an RFA once things are finalized. So that is one important, so that's one tool that will help to advance our downtown goals. Another component of the downtown action plan is what we call destination corridors. So there are a number of opportunities on the horizon. The Pennsylvania Avenue sort of reimagining initiative that the National Capital Planning Commission is advancing. This is going to be taking place in the same 5 years as our economic development strategy. Big opportunity to think about Pennsylvania Avenue. We've got the Johns Hopkins Research Hub opening later this year on Pennsylvania Avenue. There are ways to think about sort of retail and entertainment destinations in a coordinated way. Downtown DC BID has been thinking very actively about this, and so we'll be digging into that through some of this work. We'll also be launching in this second quarter of our fiscal year with our Office of Planning, a downtown realm action planning process. So as we think about strategically what streets could be more people oriented, there will be a lot of stakeholder engagement around that and a sort of a targeted plan to help complement some of the destination corridor work. So that leads us to discussion, and we have some prompts, some questions, but of course, feel free to ask whatever's on your mind. So our questions for you: how can the property tax regime accelerate the transformation of downtown to a vibrant neighborhood and destination? Should the district consider changes to property tax rates for mixed-use buildings and properties in the process of converting to residential use? This is something we've been hearing about from some stakeholders, and maybe Sarosh or John would like to elaborate on some of that. Should the district consider blended rates for mixed-use buildings based on the proportion of space that is commercial versus residential? And finally, or sorry, not finally, how could the housing in downtown abatement most effectively spur action, taking into account some of the current economic conditions? And again, we have a call out right now for feedback on this topic. And finally, could the tax code more effectively help activate vacant retail space in targeted areas? And we're thinking especially about places like 7th Street between F and H, where we're seeing really high levels of vacancy, but there are certainly others.
All great questions.
Good questions. Who has answers?
Exactly.
Well, I'll ask, I mean, I asked you all this question the other day, what was your response? But I'll ask it here because I think that this is something we should be thinking about. But with the move to try and shift to more residential use downtown, and I guess with conversions in particular, and not so much new building, but have you all modeled out what what the reduction in property tax collections would be, because we'd be moving from commercial to residential? And then I know you also maybe looked at like the sales tax changes you think might come from more residential, but I'm just curious, like, if you have that analysis and if you could share it with the tax commission. I think that's something that should be.
So, yes. Do you want to say?
Yeah, I'll take it up. So I don't know that we have it to an extent that they could get a positive this from the CFO's office, but I'll allow you all to work on that. So a vacant office building, though, by our quick back of the napkin assessment would be, and it's actually a little bit more than that. We did some work on this, would be that vacant building that's a class B or C office space, meaning it doesn't have the amenities, probably a little bit older, and probably is not someplace that's going to attract a tenant while there's a flight to quality. That building, if it stays office versus if it's converted to residential, which then would yield at least class A residential, maybe, but would yield a new building or new environment, that could kick off at least 5 to 10% more taxes because of the property taxes it would still pay, to your point, less because it's residential instead of commercial. The income taxes for the people that live there, and the sales taxes.
So, but are you assuming those are new people?
Yeah, that assumes it's net residents, not just taking.
Yeah, so it's, so that, So I think that's important, but I think this is an area, this section actually where tax policy could have a big impact. So, and Sarosh can jump in here too, but as we talk to some people who are in the midst of doing a change in use, we'll say, because a lot of times conversion means actually keeping sort of the skeleton or the bones of the building, whereas some properties actually have taken down the buildings and gone back up. So change in use is what we'll say. There's one, like Commissioner McLean was talking about, the deed and recordation tax. And they, in the series of trying to bring a building from commercial to residential, they'll have to buy the building, right? So they'll pay a deed and recordation tax, and they'll buy it, and they'll pay that as a commercial building because they're buying a commercial building. It is a commercial building. But then they'll go through a planning and design process to start to convert the building, and they'll go in for permits to the Department of Buildings. And once they get those approved, they'll go take out another loan to do construction. So there'll be another closing. That still happens at the commercial property tax rate, or the commercial rate, I should say, for the deed and recordation, while they're actually paying commercial property taxes for it. So they buy the building with the intention to change the use from commercial to residential. They pay at a deed and recordation, like at the closing table, they pay commercial rate. They'll pay commercial property taxes while they do the design and the planning of that building. And then when they try to start the construction, they'll pay deed and recordation tax again, most likely, because they'll have a construction loan that they have to close and record, and they'll pay that at the commercial rate. So you could see that they're buying it with the intention to create it residential, but they pay at a commercial rate. And so that actually kind of throws off the financial modeling because it's already hard enough to do a change of use. So Sarosh, I don't know if you have missed anything on that.
No, I don't think so. I mean, I think that's very well said, you know, that it's just sort of repeatedly going to the same trough. And also in a lot of cases, particularly right now, particularly with the downtown and the economic development strategy, the way it is, it's in the public interest more so than ever to get these buildings repositioned. And so I think that's sort of a focus here, which is it's not just economic development, it's also sort of fundamental to the downtown. And so anything we can do to adjust, as John said, these projects are already very, very tight, and anything we can do to sort of facilitate that. So.
And John, I would just reiterate, we have an opportunity, and I heard you clearly, to sunset the increase in that deed and recordation tax as well.
Yeah. And I think there's to that point, there's the increase that, you know, as you mentioned, would sunset. But then there's just a higher rate at a commercial, even
Right.
that time that they have to carry it as they're trying to get it to residential. So I don't know. I mean, you don't want them then to go back and say, oh no, we're going to keep it office. So I don't know how that would work, but that's something we throw out to you all to kind of think about. And we're going to think about it as well. But if you all can help us navigate that.
And I think one element too is like, I think it's very, like one thing to consider is it's helpful to have that carrot of the lower residential rate, right? Like you don't want to take that off the table, but then to Sarosh's point, like speed, like we're talking about something transformative, you know, like let's really rethink the downtown. Like that's not going to happen overnight, but like, can we make that happen faster? I think it's in our best interest. So I think those two things are.
Yeah, and just kind of what the use of the buildings too, just kind of stepping back for a moment. So we have had companies who come to DC even during the pandemic times and who've either, you know, decided to stay in DC or expand into DC. And those companies, for the most part, have landed outside of the central business district into some of our other neighborhoods. So we need to do this because we want to attract new residents and there's a lot of vacant space, but we also just have to change downtown. It's almost as if when employers are looking where they're going to locate their business, and talk about like the office workers, they're either looking for like that view or the vibe, right? And if there's only a couple offices that are going to be trophy offices that have these like outstanding views that you can only get in DC, or they're gonna go for a vibe like, actually the work that, Edens is doing in Union Market. They were able to attract a big tech company to take out a 50,000 square foot lease. We don't see that leasing activity in the central business district because it's a bunch of sort of boxes, right? And you don't have that street level activation right now. And so that's why there's so much work we're doing to kind of change what happens on the street level downtown. But also we need to change the uses in the buildings, or it won't have a balance that employers and residents are looking for.
To that end,
Yeah.
I work in the Capital Riverfront area, so it's not in downtown, I think is what you're envisioning. It actually grew by 4,000 people during the last couple of years.
Yes.
And the city has subsidized, 2 sports facilities, 2 parks, an ice skating rink, a river trail. There's a golf simulator coming in. There was a trapeze school for a while. So there was a lot of those amenities, and I think you need to attract people. So did you think of the tax code as being a means of incentivizing some of those other uses that we know create the vibe that you're
Yeah, well,
talking about?
and that's where I think like even so, and we have this laid out in the plan, like creating more residential nodes in the central business district will help us save the central business district. It'll, make it so that employers want to live there, but also residents want to live there. So we want to create that sort of same vibe that you would have in Capital Riverfront in the downtown. And if you think about all the elements you have.
Through the tax code or
Well,
through all these other?
Well, through the
uses?
tax code, the example I used earlier about sort of how you take a building and change the use from office rent, that's a tax code issue, right? And that, that's something this body can address.
Yeah, I also, go ahead.
Please.
One of the things that we've also started to notice is that, there's the law of diminishing returns, which is that, these properties have sort of a long tail in terms of their tax assessment. And so, at the same time, the private entities that have these properties, they have them assessed every quarter. And you're really starting to see depression in the overall value. And so if we're not able to put them back into active use, even having a higher tax rate will actually end up providing less money. So I think it's sort of fundamentally important to understand that, it's not just a gross absolute rate, but sort of how it relates to the actual performance of the property.
And you've already started to see that, right? I mean, just in the past year, the estimated value dropped almost 10%.
Yeah.
Nice. Jim, John, Erica, Carolyn. Yes, do you have a question before we go to part 3?
I do.
Jen,
Did I interrupt you? My apologies. Thank you so much, Gregory. I'm kind of curious as we're looking at way in which the district government can invest either directly through grant, directly through tax abatement examines. Are you looking at projects separately, for example, a residential building here, a residential building there in downtown? Or are you looking at sort of like a combination of projects where maybe a number of developers can come together and talk about how to revitalize certain stretch of a certain street? How are you planning to go kind of create that kind of coordination, or have you thought creating that kind of coordination among developers? Thank you.
I like the notion of getting the private sector to coordinate. I think that's a good one. Commissioner Young's going to laugh at this. We tried to do it a couple times in a couple different ways to try to get them to all coordinate their trash pickup, right? Literally just to get their trash picked up by the same hauler on the same days as ways to reduce traffic and just make the city operate more efficiently. And it's a hard one to crack. However, I will say that we do emphasize in the plan specific like residential nodes, where we looked at both where we have office buildings that could be converted or changed in use that are close to the amenities that you would have in any residential neighborhood. And we actually outlined what amenities we would have to add as well. So places where we might need like a grocer, if we were to create more housing in that particular area.
Early education.
And John, have you thought about creating maybe investment funds or investment like development corporation mini versions of those? I can't think of for example, focusing on a certain block, should government invest in the fund and then owners of properties in that block can become shareholders as well? I don't know, maybe it's not possible under government rules, but that might be another to look at. Thank you.
So we actually started some work with the bid and the downtown DC bid to try to understand what tools we can utilize or they can utilize to coordinate this a little bit better. So that would be something we're interested in.
And we also are planning to do sort of a block by block analysis to better understand potential for residential at the building or block level. So I think that will also inform. I mean, there's so many factors that will determine whether or not a building can be residential, but getting a little bit more granular is one of the next steps.
Let's hear from Mr. Catania and then go to part 3.
And John mentioned this to you before, and again, I don't know if now's the time, but when the East Bloc collapsed, you had East Berlin and the West Berlin. It was a city that was essentially a function of both ideologies supporting the city. They didn't have indigenous business. So when the curtain fell and the city, lost its subsidies, there were rolling blackouts of retail space. The city made a determination at that point to privilege arts. And there, in exchange for a tax incentive, tax deferment, for commercial property owner, the city decided to allow arts, mostly visual, so long as they would cover certain operating and maintenance costs, to take over the facility. And so the landowner got something, help cover operating costs, which is its own issue, frankly, now. The city helped subsidize it through a lower tax rate, but candidly, that was just, kind of building in the future, because that rate was going to decrease anyway as you had a proliferation of vacant and useless property. And a funny thing happened on the way to the forum, and that is they created the most vibrant arts district in all of Europe. It is a destination. It is now responsible for a statistically significant part of the huge tourist attraction of vibrancy. I'm not saying it has to be the arts, but I think we have other priorities. We're trying to create incentives for Black and brown businesses. So however you decide that these are the categories of businesses that would get this special treatment of, a rent-free in exchange for just covering your operating costs so that they get a cheap place to start. The landowner gets a break. And, at the same time, we have a street front that is full of promoting an important social policy. I just would urge you all to investigate how that worked. It might not be optimal, but it worked.
You go to Berlin and check it out.
Yeah.
Let's go.
Yeah.
Okay.
That John might mention. We actually did, we were in London in December, and one of the things they talked about was focusing on experiential retail. So something that you had to go and see. We saw some immersive art, actually, immersive art studio. What do we call it? What do we call it? Studio. Yeah.
Studio.
Yeah. Where they actually took, we have one of these now, or soon have one, vacant movie theater. And there's different sort of immersive art that you go into each theater. And they also, host like corporate events and things like that, but as a way to take some space that's being underutilized. And or there's one in Chinatown too that's going to become available.
It's just, however you prioritize the incentive, it brings people down, and there are, some interesting side effects.
Yep, absolutely. We'll look at the model, sure. And but that's also work that this body can put forward its recommendations to and be part of it. So
Part 3.
All right. Successful business goals. So the comeback plan has 2 goals in the business area. So the first one is creating 35,000 new jobs in targeted sectors by 2028. And then the second one is increasing the share of minority-owned employer businesses by 33%. So the first one, when we talk about these target accepted jobs by 2028, we're talking about hospitality, tourism. We're talking about life science and health tech, education research, communication and design. These are some of our high growth targeted sectors here that we want to grow the 35,000 new jobs. So if we weren't to do any incentives at all, any kind of programming, we're anticipated to add 11,600 jobs by 2027. This here says we want to build upon that and create an additional 23,000 jobs by 2028. So how do we kind of do that? This is by attracting new employers here, helping our existing employers grow and retain the existing employers that we have here in the city. When we talk about increasing the share of minority-owned employer businesses by 33%, obviously in the last 3 years, COVID happened. Lots of brick and mortar businesses have closed. Our Black and brown businesses, particularly, were having trouble getting loans to kind of stay alive. PPP was a challenge as well. So the goal here is to kind of reestablish the pace at which we were growing minority-owned employer businesses by, I think it's three. By continuing to grow 3.6%. So in order to do that, we need to open more businesses, but then also focus on how do we help our businesses recover and creating incentives and programs around that. So those are the two goals that we have here that are part of the comeback plan. Those targeted sectors that you see here, the 4 white ones, these are our strong service sectors that are projected to continue to grow. We want to continue to bolster those 4 sectors: education, research, consulting services, communication design, hospitality, tourism. To the right, you'll see here that the region is definitely growing in the life science, health tech, technology, cybersecurity sector. However, in DC, we have a very small representation of those businesses. That's where we're focusing on. That's our opportunity there. This is where we want to think about how do we partner, consider what our infrastructure looks like to attract those type of businesses here in DC, so that we can increase our market share of those businesses. Key insights. Slide. Like I said, we do have a strong service-based sector, the ones that I just mentioned before on the side, and a stable employer base here. In terms of automation, we're more resilient in automation than most of our peers, meaning that we'll see less job displacement as a result of that. When we think about our businesses here that start and are established, we have a higher rate of success of our employers, our businesses, surviving beyond 5 years. However, the challenge is losing workers, growing the businesses. They might establish it, but keeping them here, right? And then funding to our neighbors. Some of the things that you already heard Sharon kind of talk about a little bit, but thinking about how do we continue to identify incentives and opportunities to help our growing businesses stay, because we are looking to be more competitive than our partners in the region. So thinking about what are some of the tools. We have some exciting tools right now, but we certainly would love to have more tools in our toolkit when we think about how we want to keep those businesses here. There's a slide here that talks a little bit about our share of cybersecurity and opportunities to grow the life science space. Again, partnering, thinking about how to create an infrastructure for the types of life science companies, not all of the entire industry, but thinking about the subsectors in life science, health tech, and cybersecurity. What makes sense for DC? What are the existing opportunities that we have, the low-hanging fruit to grow and increase our market share in life science tech? If you go to the next slide, one of the opportunities that we have when we think about DC is operating your business here in DC. So when we did a survey, we rank 58%. We rank 58th percentile amongst 134 North American businesses in the country. So that's not that exciting. This is an opportunity for us to think about how do we help businesses continue to grow and thrive, but creating some sort of easement there. When we did a survey, when we surveyed the businesses here, they said the top 3 challenges that they have in operating their business is access to capital, loans, taxes, some of the regulatory parameters and challenges, and then labor access. Now, in terms of city regulations, you guys probably guessed it, Office of Tax Revenue Compliance, registration through DCRA, which is now the Department of Licensing and Consumer Protection. In the acronyms there now. And then also parking, delivery zones, enforcement, that kind of thing. So those are some of the top major challenges and opportunities for our businesses. So as we're thinking about our business environment here, the most exciting part that we're focusing on is the attraction, while also really trying to make sure that we are retaining our existing employers that we have, right? No leakage, just let's keep them here and find opportunities and ways for us to help them grow. And then also helping our employers expand. Something that we're doing right now, and one of the exciting tools that was launched last year was the Vitality Fund. This is a fund that is one of the very first that we've had in a while that is a big competitive. It allows us in this region to truly attract new employers here to the district, and also an opportunity to retain employers here as well. And so we're excited about this particular program. We've already gotten some significant uptick in movement with our Vitality Fund. Also, what we've been doing, you guys are all familiar with the Washington DC Economic Partnership. In the past, historically, this has been an organization that has really helped us focus on bringing food businesses, grocers here to the city. We have now also added to their charge in helping us attract more office tenants as well. And so we've been building some foundational processes whereby we work collectively to attract new tenants here. And they are kind of the scope of helping us generate leads and conversations to the point where we're preparing to make a deal, and then can we begin to close those deals and keep it here, right? But also activating some campaigns relative to our existing employers that are looking to stay, employers that are growing. How do we help pour into those employers and thinking about the campaigns that we do? It's not a one silver bullet for all things, but it's definitely a step in the right direction. So we're really excited about the work that is taking place. And that's a multi-tiered approach as we think about what's happening in Golden Triangle. The Deputy Mayor just mentioned the Equity Innovation Hub that we're working with them in Georgetown, GW, I'm sorry, as we think about the type of high growth employers that want to come into that space. Also, as we're working with the mobility district that just was created, as we think about transportation and the kinds of innovations that are taking place there, how can we bring some of those employers here to the district? And so those will help us add and create those 35,000 jobs that we're looking for, but also to create a more diversified, robust opportunity for our residents and jobs. So I'll pause there. I think we had questions.
I just have a comment. Sharon said earlier, awareness is so key. And I think with your two goals in terms of creating new jobs and also increasing the number of minority businesses, at some point, the current businesses in DC have to be aware. And sometimes it's our fault because we don't know. You know, we know now, obviously, DC is a website. But I think that's going to be key in figuring out how do we accomplish these two goals. The other comment I have is that we need to look at the businesses outside of just retail, like the consultant firms. What are going to be the incentives to get them to help you achieve particularly goal A? How do you get them to stay and to grow? You know, to start a business in DC and then to be able to grow, that's a different ballgame. There's so many, I don't want to say pitfalls in trying to get contracts, and particularly if you're a consulting firm and you're not a multi-million dollar consulting firm. And these are the kinds of opportunities that consulting firms need to have to continue to stay and grow in DC.
I think it definitely is an opportunity to continue to think about how we engage, because people don't know if they don't know. And how do we package that in a way where everyone can consume to take advantage of the opportunities? There are a litany of different funding mechanisms, but like which one makes sense for particular for marketing services or business services and that kind of thing. And so how do we, find ways to market that these are opportunities that are available that we want you to say. So that's definitely something that, we want to work on.
And to also be intersectional across agencies within the district government. It's not just the one agency that has to have this.
We have some questions for this section two?
Johnny, I have a question.
I think they have one more slide, don't you?
That's, oh, yeah. Our
Yeah.
graphs. Oh, we don't have.
There's a lot.
All right, Mr. Hudson.
Question,
He has one more.
well, maybe more of a comment than a question. You have on, I think page 20, life science and health tech as an area. Give them thought of the possibility of the district becoming a leader in any of those particular categories. We have, well, we've got 5 small hospitals in the district. And the eye clinic and option is bigger than all 5 of those hospitals. Question whether we're given thought from the leader in a health area or a health science.
So, health tech and life sciences, I wanted to say health sciences, life sciences and health tech. This is a place that we've identified as an area of regional strength, where there is a lot of opportunity and we probably need to be sort of targeted in how the district approaches this. So, we don't expect to, go head to head with the I-270 corridor and everything, right? But we have some real specialization when you look at things like devices. A lot of the work coming out of the J Labs and the Sheikh Zayed Pediatric Innovation Center at Children's. There's a lot of opportunity there, I think, to go deep on devices and sort of specialize. Same with health tech and like software. We've got a lot of data science expertise in DC, and applications in the healthcare space are a place where we see ourselves being probably better positioned to compete at a national level. And I think there's opportunity to grow the pie. 3 billion, I think, in venture capital investment went to life sciences companies in the DC region. 3 billion, 4 billion, a lot of billions, like a lot of money. And DC companies pulled down maybe 3% of that. There's opportunity to capture more of that, we think.
And there is conversation and ongoing coordination with the hospitals to your point.
At every meeting we have, we always come back to broadening the tax base. And sometimes last week we talked about the potential of having pilots. The last speaker talked about a business activity tax, which talked about eliminating the unincorporated franchise tax and basically it's a VAT tax. We've also spoken about the per employee fee, which the previous commission recommended as ways of generating revenue, broadening the base and providing relief elsewhere. Do any of those strike you as complicating or otherwise impeding some of these goals that you have for attracting businesses back? I mean, obviously, no one wants to pay more taxes, but in the spirit of broadening the tax base, what kind of impressions do you guys have?
I would, you could jump in, Sharon, but.
I'll let you.
Well, I wouldn't want to just sort of jump around each of those proposals, but I think just a couple things, just anecdotally that we hear. The mayor tried in the last budget to reduce the payroll tax that we use to fund the paid family leave. It's outperformed CFO's estimates. And so, that ability to kind of cut that tax is a signaling to the marketplace that, we'll, need to fund specific programs, but if we've taken too much, we're willing to give some back, right? So that signaling is important. I don't mean this personally directed at anyone, but I've heard more companies mention cutting the check each year for the ballpark fee has been one that has literally led some companies to leave. And the way the ballpark fee works is you have to have revenue over $5 million. And so when Smugly talks about companies that grow here, that start here, and then they grow, when they start becoming successful, they get hit with a new tax that they never thought they would have to pay. And so I think just kind of as you look at the overall picture, I think it's just sort of what do we have on the books that we can peel back before, you know, we have new incentives. I think that signaling to the marketplace, I think is really important. And then, you know, if life sciences and research and development are, you know, important, there are different programs that the states around us have that we can definitely send more information, or if you all researched it, that make it a little bit easier for those like life sciences companies to start up and then have tax advantages because they're located in our surrounding jurisdictions. So I'd look to those and see how we can emulate them.
Right, and, you know, this is maybe less about broadening the base, but as we think about how to grow some of those target sectors like life sciences and health tech, we at one point did start looking into the R&D credit, I think that Maryland has. And, you know, I think that's an area that would really benefit from some tax experts taking a look at. That, you know, as you guys think about very specific opportunities, that alongside, you know, what's the sort of tax experience of a company that is poised to grow? You know, and are there any sort of built-in deterrents to a company staying here and expanding? That's another question I think that would be worth exploring.
Well, can we throw that question back to you, actually? I mean, I'm curious about your business survey that you all did, and you have kind of a line here that lumps city taxes, fees, and regulations all together. I wonder if you have those like broken out. And I also just wonder if you have breakouts of any of your data by sort of whether businesses are minority owned or not, and like if you can ascertain from your survey what the needs of minority owned businesses actually are, kind of what the profile is. And secondary question is just sort of on the sectors that you're looking to grow, like how does that intersect with some of those goals around the growth in minority owned businesses?
So the lead, let's take the segregation by race question and our business data. Or
On the survey itself, yeah.
So generally speaking, no, it's, sorry, actually. Generally speaking, whenever we can, we disaggregate our data by race, by gender, by geography. So for business grant data, for example, we generally have like, you know, numbers that I think are can be summarized and shared pretty easily. There were two surveys in terms of the ease of doing business or the business climate. One was not ours. It was Arizona State University.
Yeah, I'm thinking about the one you did.
Yeah,
I think
other one was
those ranking studies aren't particularly useful. Good.
Yeah, I mean, I do think that we can certainly share what we have. I do think that it'd be beneficial to talk directly with companies about their experience. You know, some of our partners, you know, engage with the tech community on a very regular basis and help us sort of set the table for some of those conversations. And, you know, for tech and tech-enabled companies in particular, you know, a lot has changed in the last 20 years since the Qualified High Technology Company credits were created. That feels like a place that might be ripe for a fresh look. And so I think maybe having a structured conversation or a focus group or, you know, several maybe with some of those companies would be really beneficial in addition to the breakdowns that we can share.
John, can I ask, when you approach universities, as right now, you know, because I've been chirping about payments in lieu of taxes. One way I think universities can make a huge contribution to our economy is through very targeted investments, certain subject matters. So I don't see us, for instance, being a powerhouse in engineering, whether it be environmental or software, until we have a really robust engineering capacity in the city. And with the exception of Howard and with GW, we don't really have. And I don't mean to offend anyone, but I mean like, you know, no offense, but I mean like really sought after. And this is not, Carolyn, to be diminishing of UDC. I'm just talking about our larger universities. the capacity to really produce world-class software engineers doesn't exist in the district. So we're not really going to have those businesses, or the environmental engineering, we're not going to have those businesses unless we have a talent pool. So one of the ways universities can build on their existing capacity, whether it be automotive or aeronautics, which Howard has, or whatever, there is the capacity to approach the universities, build on their existing programs, help them buy the talent in exchange for no payment in lieu of taxes, in exchange for a nicer way, a nicer campus plan, right? Giving them something in return for that investment that creates the people that we can have that will populate these jobs. I will say on behalf of the qualified high tech, that we watch a company that I brought to the city walk right out the door because the council decided it knew more, having never consulted with the company. We had, the founders were the Skype founders, Atihela and Janis Friis, these autonomous robots. By the time the count, we had 42 employees, majority minority, on 16th Street, when the council, in its infinite wisdom, decided it wanted to grab the money for its own purpose. That majority minority workforce walked right into Northern Virginia, and the minorities didn't follow. And there are 1,000 people working for that company who should be in the district. Should be here. Those opportunities should be here. They're not. So I hear people say, oh, they don't work. Well, I'm telling you from my experience, representing about a half a dozen tech companies, why they come and why they don't. And instability and regulation, uninformed elected officials, ranks near the top of the list.
Yeah, I mean, some of the work we're given too, because all companies are, really emphasizing the seeking talent. They go where the talent is now. But having a stable tax and regulatory environment is definitely a factor. I mean, it goes to the example I used, sorry, I need to point that to you, with the ballpark fee. We can't penalize companies when they grow and they're successful, and they sort of walk into like more of a tax burden. And so that's, I think your example is just as fitting. But one of the ways, in addition, that we work with the universities are like in life sciences. We have a program right now where we're using, it's called the Capital Projects Fund from U.S. Treasury. We're going to direct that to 4 partners to grow their life sciences work. So GW, Howard, Whitman Walker, and Children's. We'll divide up that $92 million to make sure they invest in facilities, so they have world-class facilities, so they can keep attracting talent and also do training. And it's in some of those life sciences areas where we think there's a growth opportunity for us to not necessarily take on I-270, but like wearable technology, or what GW is going to work on is how to actually perfect telemedicine, because telemedicine will be here to stay. So what we're doing is proactively going out and giving grants to try to create that ecosystem. But for you all, what you all have to analyze is, when companies start to grow, then they go usually. Like that's the problem we have that we're trying to reverse. We can't keep them. So what is the different tax reasons they leave? And tax and regulation kind of go together, hand in hand in that sense.
Yesham, do you have a question?
Thank you, I do. And following on the discussion, do you guys have a sense of where's the sweet spot for DC in kind of investing in businesses? Is it incubating new businesses? Is it trying to attract mid-sized businesses who can grow here? Or is it trying to attract large established businesses or quarters or things like that?
I'd say in the sort of the headquarters search, because of the tax and regulatory environment, they usually land, outside of the district. I think that, and that's why it's important for us, or the companies that they grow here, for us not to keep them. So we work with companies. We were up in New York last summer to celebrate Physical Note, a technology company that started in DC. we were able to give them some grant dollars to make sure that their office could be at 11 Avenue. They've grown, they've gone public. And so what we need to do is make sure that they stay, companies like that stay in DC. There's other ones. What's that? Yes, yeah. Xylem is a company that moved here that, yeah, they do literally water innovation. They moved to Capitol River.
Yeah.
They have a water innovation center at the yards. And so they moved here because they wanted to be closer to policymakers. So I think for us, how do we keep as many companies that start here and grow here? And, you know, we say just that Washington is the place where you come to change the world. So people like Xylem, who want to change how people access water around the world, they should be here because they want to be close to the federal government, which makes policy, creates investment in R&D to actually help spur those. So, Yesham, to your question, I think our focus is, you know, on growing, and we don't do well if it's, you know, like a defense contractor is looking at land from another city. That's not where we compete the best. We'll always make a run at it, but that's not the place where we compete the best.
Commissioners, do you have any questions or? Well, you guys covered a lot in 90 minutes. That was really a tour de force. Thank you very much. And thank you for breaking out the questions as they relate to tax policy. I can assure you that our research director is going to answer all those questions fully, but it's
Tomorrow morning.
Tomorrow morning. Speaking of iterative processes, we'll get back to you and let's exchange information over time. And we might have some requests from you guys after we do some more research, and you might want to add to our research agenda. So just let us know, and we're happy to do that.
Yeah, and we'll be doing some work in this area. We mentioned housing in downtown. We actually posted our program to get feedback now, and the program won't start until October 1st, but to get feedback now to understand how the marketplace would react. So for all of this, we're open to feedback. We're trying to figure out ways to keep the feedback loop coming to us and do that in a productive way so people take advantage of the programs that we have. So in that sense, we want to do that with you all. So
anything to add to the?
No, I would just say, you know, we do need to continue to think about the idea. The questions you pose to us are great. I do think, you know, we should think about what questions we have both on the tax implications of the plan that we want to answer for ourselves, but also questions that we want to throw back to you all, because you say you are going to be doing the punching. And I feel like there's a number of things where, hey, we're the tax experts, you guys are the economic development experts. Your data, your access to sources of information will be really helpful to us as we put together some information. So just thanks tremendously. And I know we'll be in touch. And we'll be back here, as I said, at the beginning in 2 weeks for a conversation that's a little more inward looking, a little more focused on the work of the 2013 Tax Commission and other tax commissions around the country. And really a conversation about where our work goes from here, because I think we're at the time in the cycle where it's appropriate for us to step back a little bit, process conversations we've been having and think about, okay, what are the useful kinds of conversations and what are the useful kinds of research we need to undertake going forward if we're going to come anywhere close to meeting our stated timeline. So we'll be talking about that in 2 weeks and a really good conversation.
Okay, thank you, Team DimFed. That was great.
And thank you all too, on behalf of the mayor, thank you all for serving. I know the rollout is always the most glamorous part of the work. When you know, everybody gets announced that they're serving on the Tax Revision Commission, then you find yourself late at night in a conference room with us. So appreciate the work, and I know we're anxious to see it. I know we'll sort of miss a budget cycle, but we're thinking about this work, and I think the work that you all do can really help us achieve this combat plan. So thank you for this time you're putting into this.
Thank you.
Thank you. All right, there's no other business. I think we are adjourned. Thank you.
Hello there.
Hey, yeah, Suresh.
Show me it again.
Okay.